Okay, so now we're going to talk about advanced threshold configs. Now I'm going to pick up where I left off in the last video, so if you haven't seen the basic threshold config and you don't really know what all these values mean, then go back and watch it. So for right now, we're just going to go ahead and move forward. So you can see here that we've got our basic config here, a really basic tuning scenario set up. And I think that's the one you're going to use most of the time. Most of the time, you're just going to set all of the databases to be to grow and shrink their resources at given intervals. But there are going to be times when some power shops need a little bit more. And so we've tried to give that to you here, and I think we've done a really good job. I think you're going to like this. So what we do here is we give you the begin time, the end time, and the day of week, so that you can really get some fine-tuned resource control here. So let's say, for example, that for all of your databases over 150 gigs, you want them to use 15 files and 1,000 buffers. And of course, we know from the last video that this is an impossible value, but we use it for testing. And again, notice that it corresponds with the row ID here. So it just helps me determine when I'm doing this which row the value is coming from, so I can make sure it's doing what it's supposed to. Then when I'm done, I'll go back here and fill in the transfer values that I want. So let's say that we've got this condition where when during the weekdays we have really heavy business and we can't afford the resources for 15 files and 1,000 buffers. It just maxes out the server, and the server just can't take it. It comes to a crawl and our business suffers. So during the weekday, we can't really take that kind of hit on our resources. So what we need to do is, if any backups kick up during the weekday, then we need to taper those back a little bit. So let's go ahead and do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this row. And now that I've got this row copied, let's go ahead and make a change. So I want to say that for a weekday, instead of 15 files, I want to use a max of 10 files and 500 buffers. And I'm going to change this to 9 so I can make sure that I'm getting the row that I defined. So again, this is a very specific scenario, right? I want all of my databases to back up using these configs right here, except on a weekday when I want anything over 150 gigs to use this one right here, because this 15 and 1,000 is just too much. So let's go ahead and run that. So I've got this set at 152. And you see here, I'm using my 10 files, I've got my 500 buffers, and my max transfer size is 99999, which means it's coming from this row right here, and that actually should be 10, but anyway. So it's definitely coming from this row. Now, even better than that, I can specify the time of day. So let's say that I want different configs to be for different times of day. So the busy time of my day is between 7 and noon, right? So let's go ahead and copy this row again, and then let's paste it in there. Now I'm going to keep everything the same, except for this weekday. I'm going to specify a couple times. I'm going to steal that time right out of here. There we go. So I'm going to give this a begin time and an end time. Now, this is on a 24-hour clock, and I'm going to tell you that if it's a single-digit hour, as in 9 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock, then you have to precede it with a 0. So I said from 7 to noon, right? So if I want to do that for 7 o'clock, I go 07, and then make that 12. So from 7 to noon on weekdays, I don't want to use 10, I want to use 5, and we'll say 250 just to make it. And then we'll use 111111. So I'll use all ones there instead, because that's the 11 row, right? So now I've got this config where, let's talk through this again, where all the databases are going to use this config, except on weekdays they're going to use this config, unless it's between 7 in the morning and noon, and then it's going to use this config. And so right now it is Tuesday at 10:54 a.m., so we should get 5 files and a buffer count of 250 for anything over 150. Okay, so now let's run this again, and you see now that we still have our 152. So now what we're expecting to see is since it's between 7 and noon on a weekday, we're expecting it to use 5 files and 250 buffers instead of what we would use the rest of the day. So let's go ahead and see if we get that. Come here, there, and there we have our 5 files and we have our 250 buffers, and we're coming from the correct line. Now let's change our threshold again. Let's change our time this time to be from, let's see, it's 11 o'clock now, so let's say it's between 7 and 11, and it's just a little past 11. So since it's past our busy time, I would expect it to use this row right here and give me 10 files and 500 buffers, because we've passed our time right here, right? So I would expect it to use that. Let's see what we get. And I get my 10 files and my 500 buffers, and I'm coming from row 9, just like I would expect to right there. So you can see that we've got a lot of flexibility. Now that's just for the weekday. Let's say that I want to do something on, that I want to override these values on Tuesday, since it's Tuesday today, and let's say Tuesday, right? So let's say that ordinarily between now, and I'll go ahead and change this back to noon to make sure that we would ordinarily be covered during that time. 12, I need to put my colon there. There we go. So I've got that row covered for a weekday, but I can also override specifically on Tuesday. And let's go ahead and paste that in there. And now, I gotta refresh that. There we go. Now on Tuesdays aren't so busy, so I'm gonna use 7 files just so that we have something that we can look at, right? And 275 buffers. And then here we'll use 121212 because that's row 12. And between 7 and noon, and let's change this to Tuesday. There we go. So now, while I ordinarily have, for all the weekdays, I have row 11 set up, specifically for a Tuesday, I want this row set up with 7 and 275. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like. And remember, today is Tuesday at about 11:06, so we definitely fall within this range. So let's see. And I get 7, 275, row 12, 12, 12. So you can see it's definitely respecting my threshold values. Now this is for all the databases. If I wanted all of the databases to use this base level config here, where is that base level config? I think it stops here. There we go. But on weekdays, I only wanted this one database, say Minion dev, to use these values, right? So I've got this, I've got that, I've got that, and just so that we are complete, let me copy this because I like to follow my own advice. And let's set up a 0 all row for that. And then we can make our 0 all row whatever we want. But for now, I'll make it 1 and 0 and 0. And this will be null. There we go. And I'll say dev 0 all if I want to do it like that. There we go. So now it's really easy to see what I intended. So, you know, from the basics video, and this is the one thing I'm going to repeat from the basics video, right, is if you have a named database, then you need to have that 0 all row in there to catch stuff that's not there otherwise. So now this will only apply to the Minion dev. So let's check that out and see if that actually holds true. So I'm going to back up Minion dev, and I would expect for the time frame I'm in to see 7 and 275 here coming through here. So Minion dev 152, 7 and there we go, 7 and 275. That's exactly what I expected to see. Now, if I wanted to back up a different database, let's look and see what else we would have here. Well, let's back up the bit database. Why not, right? Now, the bit database is really small, but we can pass in any value we want to test. So let's pass in bit as a full at 152. Bit. There we go. As a full at 152 and see what we get. You can see I get that original 15. So where is my 15? Right there for over 150. And so it definitely holds true that this is what I expected to get, because all of these other ones are for Minion dev, not for the other databases. So this is the exception to all of those default rules that I have set up, right? Now I can also set this up. Now, see, I've got this, I've got the backup type here, and I've got my space type. This is the last topic we're going to talk about because it's important for you to understand how this works. But I can also set up backup types. So if I wanted a specific backup type between these times on a specific day, then I could also do that, right? So, of course, this takes specific days, but it takes weekday and it also takes weekend. So I can pull my resources back on the weekdays, and then I can open them wide open during my maintenance window on the weekend, and I can use a lot more resources, and I don't need any extra jobs. I don't need to switch anything back and forth every week. All I've got to do is set up those rows in here, and it'll take care of it. It'll read that it's a weekend, and it'll take care of it. So the question comes, what about a log? So let's go ahead and add another row here just for the log. And I'll paste that, and I'll put this as a log backup. So it doesn't really equate to anything real to say data and index. And again, if you don't understand what that means, then go back to the original video, to the basics video. But it doesn't really mean anything here to say I want to take a log backup with these parameters if the database is this big, because who cares how big the database is for a log backup? What's important is how big the log is. So I'm going to switch this to log right here. And so I'm going to say if the log is over 20 gigs, then I want to use 4 files and 200 buffers and a max transfer size, in this case of 14, 14, 14, right? And I definitely want to compress it, and so on, right? And here I'll say Minion dev 20 log, so I just get a sense of what this is for. So you can see here that I've got a log backup, and I'm telling it to take it from the log. Now, what does that mean? What that means is how big the active portion of the log is. If the log is 90 gigs, but it's only, 2% full, I don't know what that would be. We'll say that's 5 gigs, right? I have no idea what that is. Then it's not going to use this value because it's under 20 gigs. But if the used portion of the log is 20 gigs or over, then it's going to use these values. And that comes in really handy when you have transactions every now and then that really blow your log out to a really big size. So let me give you a good scenario. You're taking log backups every 30 minutes. And usually those log backups run in 5 or 10 minutes. But this one time, or maybe even periodically, you have a large transaction that comes through here and blows your log really big. It increases the log by, say, 50 gigs, right? So in a scenario like that, you're trying to take these log backups every half hour. You come across this 50 gig log, and it's going to back up ordinarily in this scenario with this row right here, which means it'll use one file. It'll use all the defaults. So it's going to take SQL quite a long time to back up 50 gigs with a single thread, right? So using a single file and however many buffers it's going to use, probably, you know, around 10, you know, 7 to 10, 14, something like that. But it's going to be a really low number because SQL backups are meant to be really non-invasive. So you're expecting your log backups to kick off every half hour, but this one takes, say, I don't know, maybe an hour to back up because it's so much bigger than everything else. So now you just threw off all of your log backups and you're not protected on these guys like you thought you were, because it took this 50 gigs so much longer to back up. So that's what this row is for, right? So you can tune that and say, you know what, this database gets blown out every now and then. So I want to take this and I want to say if it's over this much time, or for any of the databases, right? You could add a Minion default row and catch all of the database logs, which is probably smarter. So if I get a log backup that's over, and the log is over 20 gigs, then I want to use these resources right here, and what'll happen is it'll increase those resources and back up that log a lot faster than it ordinarily would have, and help keep you on track. Maybe you stand a lot better chance of staying within your half-hour window for those log blowouts than you would otherwise. So that's what that row is for. And again, this is how cool this is. I can even specify over here on a weekday between this time and this time, if a log is over this big, I want to use these resources. So you can even tell it not to. You can tell it to blow the log out of the water and use, you know, 20 files and 1,000 buffers, or you can say, you know what, I need this to be tapered and I only want to use, you know, 5 files and 100 buffers, but I still want it to back up faster than it would have natively without any flags set. So you can see there's an awful lot of power here, a lot of flexibility. You can do almost anything you want, and you can get really fine-grained configurations. I caution you to test using this method when you set up your scenarios, though, because the more complicated that you get in here, the easier it is to make a mistake. So what you should do is set up something similar to what I have here, especially with the max transfer size, so that you can see what row it's coming out of, and you can make sure which row which row you're getting your values from, because this doesn't do anything other than produce a statement. So this is the exact same call that the stored procedure makes to get the statement back to run. So this is an excellent way for you to test your config to make sure it's going to do exactly what you want it to do before you rely on it. So this is how that's done. We're testing the number of thresholds. We're testing our threshold values here. So that's the advanced threshold config. I hope you guys enjoy it. I hope you use it. I actually hope you don't have to use it much, but if you do, I hope we've given you enough power here to do everything you need to do. One more thing real quick before I go. I just looked down here and noticed that the command is empty and the backup drive and all of this stuff is empty. I've been concentrating on the thresholds, but you notice how all of this stuff is empty and we're not actually backing up, right? So this is again where you can use this to troubleshoot your configuration. Maybe there's something wrong with the paths on this thing. Let's take a look. So I've got settings path right here. I'm going to edit these rows, and I notice here that this is active is set to false. So I've only got one row in here, and that's Minion default, and I had it set to false, so it doesn't have any rows defined. So now when I run this, I should actually get values in there, and now I get values in there. So you see, we give you enough rope to hang yourself, unfortunately, but that's why all of those values haven't been filled in through this entire video, because that was turned off. I was concentrating on the other stuff and not on that. So now that I turn that back on, now I've got full of values. There you go.